Good morning, everyone. So today you and I are going to talk about code reuse. So let's get into it. Now, code reuse is a tricky subject. And I honestly believe that there is more shitty projects and more bad code written in the name of code reuse than any other practice. And let me tell you why. You see, the issue with code reuse is that very often you find that engineers will have the idea that this is a component, or like they're building a piece of software or a piece of code or anything like that, and ahead of time they kind of get this fingertip feeling that, hey, this is something we're going to be able to use many times over. And more often than not, you make the mistake of forgetting that foreseeing how something is going to be used in the future or the different specifications it's actually a very tricky thing. Let me explain it. So let's take a classic example. I think this is probably the biggest villain in all of this. A modal window, a pop-up window on, say, a web page, for example. Now, in general, I see two approaches to solving this problem. The first approach is the one that shows me that the person who made this have kind of done this. They have kind of tried to foresee all the different cases for this. So what usually happens when you're building a modal is that you create the overlying structure, because a modal window usually, like in at least mentally, the way that you see a modal is that you have some type of header section and you have a footer section, just like a web page. There's always a header and a footer, and then there's a content area. And usually how the differences of the modal will determine what type of message it is. It could, say, be a warning, a information message, it could be an error message, and usually the main difference is that there are color differences, right? That's what you think. So you sit down, you create this modal, right? Awesome, you are happy. So this modal that you have has a OK button as the footer, and it has a header section with the cross, which basically does the same thing, and then the content area and some color. Everything is right with the world, and you're happy, you ship it, it works for your use case. And then a few days later, your project manager comes in and says, hey, we're going to need a modal where the user can also cancel the modal, not just press OK, but it needs to be able to cancel, or he or she needs to be able to cancel. And we need to semantically know when a user presses OK, because sometimes when you press the OK button, you should go forward, and sometimes your behavior should be a little bit different. And you go, OK. And so you add an if condition. If something show one footer, because you have two footers now. So you have a footer for an OK button and one for an OK and a cancel button. And then the next feature, and you ship that, and now your generic modal can support both these cases. And then the next feature comes in, and your customer says, hey, sometimes I want there to be like an icon in the header next to the information, so you can see if it's an info or a error or a warning. And you go, okay, so you put another if condition in your generic little modal. So sometimes there's going to be an icon, sometimes there's not going to be an icon. Cool, right? And then a new feature for your request comes in where they say, okay, so this time we want there to be social media support so that you can share this information message. So now you need to, sometimes you're going to show some icons that links to like a Facebook page or something like that. And so you add another if condition, because sometimes you're going to, and you see the problem. Do you see this is the problem? You thought that this modal thing, just because conceptually it's the same component, that you're going to be able to reuse all that code over and over and over, just because you make the mental mistake to think that just because something is in the same group as whatever it is, you basically made the generic abstraction before ahead of time. That's your mistake. And I argue that the way that you should think about this is to think about it as a abstraction that has to grow over time. What do I mean by growing over time? Let me explain how good code reuse is made. Assassin's Creed. Now, for those of you who don't know that, that's a very big gaming franchise. It's a game series that I play myself. I've played all the major games. And when they started out, it was only really in the third game where I started noticing something. Because the game was, the first two games were, like, they had some similarities, but for the most part they were fairly you know, when you're a programmer, you start thinking about it in a different way. And there were these people, and this is true for other games as well. Dragon Age 2 had a lot of criticism for reusing a lot of the maps over and over, and not having a unique map for everything. And as a programmer, I can tell you this: that is utter bullshit. As a gamer, maybe this matters, but what you don't realize is that code reuse and being able to reuse things that your company has been able to produce means that you can actually produce things faster. So in the context of Assassin's Creed, the way that they have done it, which is so smart, is that the overall game experience is the same basically. The story is different and there are things added, but they have standardized components where the interactions with the component or the element in the environments, for example trees, the way that you jump between trees or you walk across trees, and ship naval battles, which is in Black Flag, these are things that they can create that are truly reusable and use in the next game. And that makes a lot of sense if you think about it, because they are creating a game series. They are not being, they are, when they are designing one game, they invest enough time into these things that they know are going to be in the next game, and then they simply reuse these things in the exact manifestation as they are supposed to be working. In other words, if you have a tree that has the exact, in the context of Assassin's Creed, if the tree needs to behave in the exact same way as in the previous game, that's a good reusable component. But if you have a different tree that needs to behave in a different manner, you create a new tree that has that other interaction. You don't try to shim in that on the same thing, because then it's not reusable. Then you're simply adding stuff on top of something that you think is reusable. And usually what happens is, as I said, you will create a single generic component that is so complicated that it actually turns into tech debt very, very quickly. So that's what I want you to take away from this. You have to, as I said, the first two games didn't really reuse these types of components, or maybe there were components that I didn't really notice, but that's the mentality. A truly reusable thing is something that you don't have to modify all that much over time. Because if you have to modify it to work for new features and new use cases, then it's not, you're not reusing it. You're fooling yourself to think that you're reusing it, but you're not. You're simply adding more stuff on an existing feature. That's why code reuse is so tricky. And my rule of thumb is, let code reuse be a happy coincidence. Build things that are right for the solution that you're working on right now, and when you've done that 2 or 3 times and you realize, hey, I'm copy pasting this component, it's the exact same thing, or maybe it's extremely similar, then you start thinking about, okay, how can I reuse that? That's a good rule of thumb. Have a great day.